Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero. Our guest today is Bill Riley. He's the author of Baghdaddy, How Saddam Hussein Taught Me to Be a Better Father, which is a sometimes tense, often humorous, always candid account of Bill's life from his turbulent childhood to a career filled with unique challenges. Bill was raised in an unstable and violent home by a mother who struggled with mental illness and a mostly absent father who only showed up to administer what we can call tough love, if we're being generous, and to take him rabbit hunting, which turned out to be valuable in profound ways. He and his sister learned to lean on each other for comfort, to cope with the cold resentment and physical abuse they faced by their parents. Now, right after high school and during the Cold War, Bill enlisted in the Air Force, where he worked in intelligence as a Soviet exercise and exploitation analyst. He went on to work in the war-torn landscapes of Kuwait, Iraq, and Saudi Arabia in intelligence analysis, communications, and supporting special operations. His life and career experience gives him a superb wit and a deep well from which to draw tremendous lessons for all of us that are as engaging as they are poignant. Joining Pete to co-host this episode is our friend Gaby Jeurgens. She's been a guest, so if you didn't hear her episode, you should go back and listen. She does a great job mining Bill for great conversation today. And if you're into these topics and you find guests like Bill and Gaby valuable and entertaining, do us a big favor and support the Break It Down show with a 5-star rating on iTunes or Stitcher or iHeartRadio or whatever platform you use to listen to us. And if you're listening on YouTube, please subscribe and hit that notification bell so you're always abreast of our new episodes. And leave a comment or write us a review, just a few words. You don't have to write a book, but a couple of thoughts about the show in as many words as you'd like to share would be great, and we'd appreciate it. And we think you'll also appreciate our guest today, Bill Riley.
Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay Moore.
This is Greg Proops.
This is Jordan Harbinger.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan
This is
East.
Sebastian Younger.
This is Rick Marotta.
This is Stuart Copeland.
This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summers.
Hey, this is Skunk Baxter.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
I'm Bill Riley, author of Baghdaddy, How Saddam Hussein Taught Me to Be a Better Father, and this is The Break It Down Show.
And now, The Break It Down Show with John Leon Guerrero and Pete A. Turner.
Yeah, this is fantastic. So one of the things I love about doing the Break It Down show is that I get to meet my fellow veteran peers, and it's always great to see those of us that transition into the arts, because I think warrior artists are probably my favorite kind. Warrior scholars, pretty good, but you know, we can be a little angry when we're warrior scholars. But the warrior artists, the ones that focus on other aspects, I just I love who we become. And I treasure these conversations. And I truly mean that, Bill. Like, I grow a lot from these kind of things and seeing how we all see war through our own individual eyes, because I'm a collector of perspectives. Another thing that I love about doing the Break It Down show is that I can have whoever the heck I want and like as a co-host. So debuting as a co-host with me today, and I'm so excited about this, is Gaby Jeurgens, the Homefront Girl. She's been on her own episode, and it's neat to be able to bring Gaby in. And she was the one that said we needed to get Bill on the show. So I'm going to give the floor to Gaby and let her continue this opening. But thanks to the both of you for doing this with me. I truly appreciate it. Gaby?
Hi, Pete. Hello, Bill. It is a pleasure to be back on the Break It Down show. Pete has an astounding and amazing podcast. So it's a pleasure to be back. Thanks for asking me to co-host. You know, I have to say, Bill, I was pretty riveted by your book. It's extraordinary. So I don't know where we're going to start off with, but I have to say that even just the opening is pretty extraordinary. So congratulations on your book.
Thank you. Thank you, Gaby. I appreciate that.
So let's talk a little bit about the book, if we can, Bill. Can you give us you talk about how Saddam, let me back up and say this. We had Kelly Hillier on the show, and Kelly was Saddam's, I guess, his PSD commander, his personal security detail commander. He was the one that jailed him, fed him, got him to and from court. And so we have this remarkable relationship between Kelly and Saddam. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is this is going to bring a lot of context into what you're about to talk about. But one of the things that made Kelly a great person for this job is, one, he's low ranking. You're not going to give a colonel this job. It's a platoon he's going to run. It's a lieutenant's job. But if he can keep Saddam calm and progressing down the path through court without having hunger strikes, without, and he was already kind of cantankerous, keeping in mind that the entire time this is happening, Saddam Hussein thinks he's going to get out of this whole thing. And there was a chance greater than zero that he might have got out of it, right? So Kelly had this impossible job to manage a world leader in a way that got him ultimately into a noose. And Kelly's like, we became friends. And when he died, I cried. I know he's a monster. I know he gassed his own people, but that's not the guy I knew. The guy I knew was scared to fly, would grab my hand, and especially in the Iraqi fashion of someone who's close. He was like a fatherly figure to me. So he took a lot from that relationship and applied it to who Kelly is today. And it sounds like your book premise is similarly aligned in that you learned things from Saddam Hussein.
Yeah, and absolutely, and it's awesome that Kelly was on there because he's got a phenomenal story.
It's incredible.
Yeah, and the perspective that. Did he talk to you about cereal and Saddam's favorite cereals?
I know we talked about his love poetry and all that stuff. I think we talked about cereal, but it's been a little while since we've had him on.
Well, I'll save that story for him because he's got a really funny way of telling it. But about Saddam Hussein, I mean, the book's subtitle is How Saddam Hussein Taught Me to Be a Better Father. And that's a polarizing concept. I mean, how does someone who's a dictator, who's committed genocide, literally, who's raised two boys who were the scourge of a nation and did horrible things.
Hey, this is Pete. Real quick, I just want to let you guys know we are proud to announce our official support of Save the Brave, a certified nonprofit 501c3 with a charter of helping veterans with post-traumatic stress. Here's how you can help. Go to savethebrave.com, click on the link on the website, and my recommendation is this. Subscribe. Give them $20 a month. You've got subscriptions that you can turn off right now that you're not using that are $20 a month. Swap that out. Get involved. Let's help these folks out.
Raised two boys who were the scourge of a nation and did horrible things. How does that teach you something? And the reality is we look for heroes. We strive to find them. We try to emulate them, but they're rare. We read about them occasionally. We encounter them. But we mostly learn from the people who give us the best examples of what not to do. That, the boss that everyone's worked for that was horrible. You learn how to not treat people as a result of that. The parents that you may encounter who display the worst techniques or the least patience with raising their children. You learn something from that. And the people that we encounter that show us what not to do oftentimes teach us the most. And in the period of this book, when I was laying out the stories that I wanted to stitch together, because I had a very specific story that I wanted to tell, Saddam Hussein was rattling a saber. He was refusing chemical weapons inspectors from going into his facilities. And every time he beat his chest, everyone I knew from every service was in Iraq or the Middle East, trying to be the control rods in his nuclear reactor. And, between amazing opportunities that I had working with some stellar individuals and between terrifying experiences I had, like most military operations, there was some downtime. And that was the period when I was really wrestling with, did I want to be a father? And from my background, could I pull that off in the way that I would be proud of?
That's fascinating. If I might just jump in here, I have to say that one of the things is this is your memoir, isn't it, Bill?
It is.
Okay. And what I actually underlined because I think that particular page, when you start Growing Pains, you made a reference to having had your first encounter, a Humvee going down, and you were in an area in Iraq, and there were children who were mobbing your Humvee. You caught a man who was trying to detonate something with his phone, but it didn't work. And there would have been children injured at that point. But you segued into something that I think really harbors on a lot of what you recall in your book. You just pointed out, we learn from sometimes the best of our lessons are those learned from what not to do. If you're not going to be a good example, then be an absolutely memorable warning, I think sometimes in people. But you said, why do they always use the kids? And I think that was a question that you carried with you, not only throughout your book, but also since, perhaps into early adulthood. I don't know at what point you reached that, but you asked yourself that question often.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was raised in the kind of think when we're raised, we just accept that as our reality. We don't question that for the most part. Your children, the parents are the gods of your world, and you move on like that for a while until you start to see the flaws and cracks in that reality. And for me, I went to war probably the first time when I was 5 years old. My father was a Vietnam vet, Force Recon guy, advanced sharpshooter, really talented man. But he came back from Vietnam very different than when he left, like a lot of vets. And PTSD wasn't something that we knew about it. We knew about shell shock. We knew about the effects of combat. We knew that, that there were psychological scars that you couldn't see that were a little bit more difficult to treat than the physical ones that were obvious. But Vietnam was an unpopular war. And the veterans that came back were, they were basically, for the most part, shunned from society unless they could prove that they could do other things. I mean, Pete, you were in the you were in the military. You were a mobile MI kind of guy, and the welcome we received when we came back from the Middle East was very different than the veterans in the Vietnam War.
Sure, yeah.
And with my father, that of course left a mark on him. He dealt with his PTSD by having a very strict moral code that, as a young boy, for me was very difficult to be able to satisfy. He really wanted the best for us. He truly did. And he worked hard to provide a roof over our heads and a good life. But his PTSD manifested itself in the way where he saw the world in just this harsh, almost apocalyptic way where his children needed to be trained to cope with the worst possible scenario that life could offer at all times. So as a parent, we always say, I'm never going to do what my parents did, especially when they're imposing rules on you when you're young. I'm never going to talk like that. I'm going to do this. I'm going to have a different course of life. And then I think we all reach the point where sometime as time goes by and we're adults, that message that our parents try to teach us activates, and we open our mouth and our parents' words tumble out. And it scared the hell out of me. I know it surprises a lot of people, but that's how parents teach the next generation. And that's, in a lot of ways, that's how we learn. And for me, my father tried to teach me these difficult lessons that I resented for a long time. I resented him for a long time. But during my last firefight in Iraq, I got it. I finally understood what he was trying to teach me for that lesson. And it allowed me to not only survive that firefight, but successfully egress my team out of there. And how do you weigh that? How do you weigh the brutality of a way a lesson was taught with the fact that it may have saved your life and allowed you to go home to the family that you love?
Let's get into that moment though, because it's easy to talk about combat and say we egressed out and everything, but let's zoom in on that moment in time, because there comes a point for those of us that have been shot at where, for most of us that get it, combat slows down. Time works really weird in combat, right? You might be in a long fight where it's like, was that like 2 minutes? And they're like, it was 2 hours,
Right.
So talk a little bit about that aspect, especially as a leader, because, you're a warrior, but because you're Air Force. So you guys call yourselves managers, right? Like instead of, something else. So you're not Army people. You're not Marines. So even more so, not that you guys can't do it, but this is not your sweet spot. Right?
It's not. The Air Force separated from the Army in 1947 for good reasons. And me being an airman embedded in the Army for a lot of my career, I can say without a doubt that those reasons haven't changed. We just have very different ways of getting to the point of applying power to produce an effect. But in terms of combat, I regardless who you are, I mean, if you're a civilian that winds up getting caught up in a force that's overrunning your land, whether you're a freshly trained Marine from Paris Island, a seasoned Green Beret, who's got a lot of experience, combat is combat, and once it becomes real, you either deal with it or you don't. You either make choices to achieve an effect, or you become a victim of it and washed away. And even with the best plan, the best training, the best fitness, there's that degree of uncertainty because you don't know how things are going to go. So you fall back on your muscle memory of your training that, hopefully you sweated more in training, so you bleed less in combat. And, we take comfort in that, but really for combat, for me, time did slow down. The noise wound up being so confusing. I was part of a pickup for an intelligence operations team that was going out to restore a link for some assets that got blown up by an IED. And we had completed our mission and everything had looked good. And as we were getting ready to exit the facility that we were in, all hell broke loose. And we were in one of the last instances at the time in downtown Baghdad, where we were still subject to heavy machine gun fire directly. And that's something that takes your breath away, because not only does it make a noise that turns into a buzz, the old sun-dried stone buildings that have a plaster veneer on them, it just started eating them up and taking them down. And the building was coming down around us as we were trying to get away from that. The saving grace was that the building had already started to come down from the previous attacks. So they were almost like berms and piles of debris that gave us some cover, so we could slowly leapfrog back. But the part of the ceiling would come down, so light rays would come in, and dust from pulverized stone that was all around in the light rays would be almost like a whiteout situation. So you could see, you couldn't see, you could breathe, you couldn't breathe. And all the while there's the heat and the pressure and, the bullets coming at you. And all the time, all you can focus on is the person to your left and right and trying to work it out so you can all get.
You both survive.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, let me ask you something, Bill, because the book, obviously, again, Baghdaddy, and then, your caption, which is How Did Saddam Hussein Taught Me to Be a Better Father? You spoke about your father as a Vietnam veteran coming back. I'm the daughter of a Vietnam veteran who came back. Of course, I was little, but his memories and the lack of sharing them, of course, is very common amongst those who fought that war. And you're absolutely right. They came back to a different world and a different welcome. And it's something that perhaps kept them for so long dealing with the trauma that at that time, PTSD wasn't a word that was used, but yet they did come back with a very hollow part of their, of inside of them. And they applied different methods of being able to get through and, go on with their lives. In many cases, many of them have never left Vietnam. But I am curious, because you spoke of your father and how he did come back, and then he came back a different man, but he tried to teach, he did teach you in the way that he did teach you, different ways, harshly, or in a way that, of course, you look back on and perhaps say, I won't do that. But you realized in combat that whatever those lessons were and how he taught them to you, helped you to move forward and deal with the situation that you went through in Iraq. Could you share with us, what in particular, some of the lessons that you feel your father instilled in you that really you recalled helped you get through what it was like to be in combat? Because I think your book really leans on that.
Well, there were several things. The first one was absolutely about personal accountability. Something that we preach in the service, but it comes down to my father and several of the male mentors in my life that left the biggest impression on me. With that were, your word is your bond. And if you say you're going to do a thing, you will do a thing regardless how much it hurts. And that last part is important because, a commitment is a commitment. And as we move out of a world where looking someone in the eye and shaking their hand is a contract, that one part of accountability about following through, about knowing that even if something is going to be hard or the rules change or something, I said I would do something. And by God, I am going to get that thing done. that was important. My father was also the line of work that he went into after he got out of Vietnam was kind of interesting for a guy who was, basically infantry scout and alone with just a few other people to support him in the worst of places, to track enemy movements and to occasionally take out very specific figures from afar with an M14 or an M16 at the time. When he came back, he became a male nurse, which was a little different than anyone would have ever expected. But he found comfort in that. He found comfort in the procedures. And he, after hurting people for a living and having a talent for it, to be able to give back and help people was something that was important to him. The other thing that's interesting is he wound up being a night director at Kings Park in Long Island, which is a storied and sometimes notorious mental institution. So even at that point, my father was looking at the bigger picture on humans behave and how he could help them, but he had trouble translating that to his own family, even though he had success professionally like that. Another lesson he taught that I think is pretty important is you have to be prepared to give it your all. His way of teaching was sort of a laboratory and of kind of very difficult situations, but he really believed that there are two types of people in the world. There are the strong who can determine what the rules are, and sometimes that's a good thing and that's a bad thing, depending on the other people in the world who are the people who just decide to take what's given to them. And for him, that was the big thing, was for us to be able to say, you have to be strong enough to be able to make the own rules, because if you can't make the rules, then you really have to comply with whatever is given to you, and you have to take the crumbs that are left over. So those two things were the most fundamental for me from my father's doctrine.
Okay, so let's go back into that combat moment, because I love how you're a writer, so you're giving me plenty of work with here. The bullets are hitting the adobe house. It's wearing away. You know that you've only got so much time. When you're in that moment, is your dad present with you? Like, had he reanimated, and is he there saying you have to act or not act, all of those things? Or is this just, talk to me about that moment, like as you're figuring out, because you're the leader, no one's moving until you're like, we're moving now, or we're going to withdraw, or whatever it is. So talk to us about that. Like, in that specific moment, how was your brain working? Because I find these stories fascinating when life and death choices are happening and you have no control over ultimately what happens, but you do have to make a decision.
Right. And in this case, I was, for the egress, I was the leader, because technically I was there to help two intelligence technicians be able to do a repair. So I was their eyes and ears, and I was an extra gun. But when the combat situation shifted, I had a little bit more experience than they did, and we worked through it. As far as my father being there, I would like, it would have been cool if, he would have materialized like Obi-Wan in one of the later Star Wars movies. Still, I would have dug that. But I think in my case, and I think in a lot of in a lot of cases for people who've grown up with parents that were very specific, my conscience is pretty much my father's voice, which is comforting and terrifying at the same time. But that nagging voice or that thought of this isn't going to go right, that's always in his voice, and that's a little rougher than this isn't going to go right. But in the case where that lesson hit home, here we are, we're in the middle of the building. It was one of those vast warehouse type buildings with a tower that the building was obviously built around, and really it was dozens and dozens of yards from the front of it to the back of it.
Oh boy. Yeah.
Like I said, we were fortunate that the part of the central roof structure had come down, and multiple firefights on the perimeter, and a VBIED that had crashed into it and took out the sensor and relay suite that we needed to get up for an intel mission was damaged as a result, but it also damaged the structure. And for us, that was lucky. The lesson my father taught me that was important for that day was human behavior. I was hunting rabbits with my father in the winter when I was a little kid. And one of the things that we spent a long time doing was, I thought that, every time the gunshot would go off and it would hit a snowbank or something, all these animals would scatter, and it was completely random, and I couldn't figure it out. And that surprised the hell out of my father. He looked at me and he goes, "So you really think that's random?" And I said, "Well, they just go everywhere." He goes, "Okay, we're going to do something." He gave me a little hot chocolate. We sat down for a while. The rabbits all came back out. And he said, "Okay, here's a set of field glasses. Take a look, pick out 3 rabbits, figure out where they are right now. And I'm going to fire a shot and spook them, and let's see what happens." So he did that. And the rabbits scattered. And, again, to my untrained eye, it was all completely random. And then after some time, another hot chocolate worth of time later, I looked again, and I was surprised as hell, because most of the rabbits had crept out of their holes and were in about the same place, at least the 3 I was tracking, where they had started before we did the fire. And progressively, we did this, terrorizing bunnies for probably the better part of the morning. And he wanted me to see, if an event happens, whether they likely happen. And part of what I learned is they'll go to lower ground, they'll go to cover, they'll proceed in a direct line after the first shots fired towards the safest place that they think they can go. And after a while, I could track rabbits. In the end, he said, people aren't much different. That's why we do similar things and we behave in similar ways. And that's where we get the expression creatures of habit, because we're not different than anything else in nature, except, we overthink things. And that experience of figuring out, okay, if this happens, what's going to happen next? And same thing as in intelligence, is what's the chain of events that are going to happen from a precipitating event or a shock point. In the simplest terms, people respond the same way. My father once, I said that, I asked him the question. I said, "Well, are people like that too?" And he goes, "Yes, they are, but never tell them that what they're going to do next." And I said, "But why?" He said, "They won't like you anymore." In Iraq, under that situation, I had observed that there was the structure was coming apart, and part of the roof there was a loft structure that was set up pretty much above where the guys had set up their machine guns. We couldn't hit the machine guns directly from where we were because, big bullets tear apart big things all around you. Yeah. We just couldn't get an angle on it. And then to make things worse, they started tearing down the front wall and coming at us from both sides to flank us. But, I figured out that, they were going to set up on the top. Those guys were going to flank us from a certain direction. And the roof was coming down. And I was very fortunate that I was able to help the roof come down on top of them. And that, knowing where they were going to be, where they were going to set up, when it started to fall, where they were going to fall, we were able to work it. So a big chunk of the roof came down on the heavy machine guns. We knew that the guys were going to stop flanking us and try to take cover as a result of that, because they didn't know. And at that point, we'd already set up the angles for the other 2 people on our team to take those guys out. And then we were able to leapfrog back and out. So that, in a nutshell, was that very weird, very distorted experience. And it kind of ended with our pickup coming to get us. And then, since I was an Air Force guy and the Army wouldn't let me have hand grenades, which was, they gave me smoke instead. So as we're leapfrogging back, I'm popping smoke. And it wasn't just like the cool all white smoke or red smoke that you get from exercise.
Was it magenta? Did they fuck with you even more?
We got magenta, we got light blue, we got all the colors of the of the rainbow. It was for LBGT month. The colors that we put out to get out of it, perfect. If I could have got a picture of that, I would have been the hero in San Francisco.
Yes,
but it provided enough Technicolor cover for us to get out at the end, and we were able to recover. There were just a few cuts and scrapes. Shrapnel beats the hell out of you, and it either big parts stick into you and do bad things, or go through you and do bad things. But what you never realized when I was stripping down afterwards to take my first shower was, even though my uniform was beat up, well, it wasn't a uniform, even though we were in civilian clothes that day, but even though the clothes were kind of ragged and torn up, what I didn't realize was my entire body was lacerated with looked like someone had covered me in little cursive red pen. And it took a while for this coat of blood that I didn't even realize was there to see all these little scrolls and swirls and nicks and cuts all across my entire body. And finally, when that flowed away, it was the first step to becoming human again. But little things that you don't expect, breathing in what for all intents and purposes is lime and chalk, and not being able to breathe like you've got is something in between asthma and allergies. And one of the guys I was with, they're tossing around baby wipes, and the first thing is you clean your face and your eyes, and suddenly you feel like you're human. But I mean, it's coming out of combat. It's sort of like cleaning the baby's cheek. Once you do the cheek, you got to do everything else, or else there's no real clean. And I saw a guy wrap a baby wipe into a twist and row the whole thing up into his nose and pull stuff out. And I thought, damn, maybe I should try that. And chunks of pebbles, all this other stuff, and like concrete comes out of your sinuses, and then all of a sudden half of your body feels like, oh, I can do that. And then you got to do the other side, and that's as painful and annoying. But the shit you talk about when you come back from that, because you don't want to talk about what you did, and you're doing other things, is just stupid and hysterical. And for me, not being able to hear was the big thing.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Hey, this is Pete A. Turner from Lions Rock Productions. We create podcasts around here. And if you, your brand, or your company want to figure out how to do a podcast, just talk to me. I'll give you the advice on the right gear, the best plan, and show you how to take a podcast that makes sense for you, that's sustainable, that's scalable, and fun. Hit me up at pete@breakitdownshow.com. Let me help. I want to hear about it.
Yeah.
We had foamies, and they were just a matter of course, but it wasn't the more sophisticated sound suppression things that you put in your ears later on that were available.
Yeah.
And to be honest, it was a couple of days before I could even hear consistently or talk, where I just told people I was like from New York, because I wasn't, but I really sounded like that for a while after.
So I want to give the audience some contextual things about what you're talking about. Foamies are hearing protection. That's those earplugs we put in our ears. And you're right, like those are sort of effective, but combat is so much louder than that, because your whole body is getting hit by the sound wave. And it is hard to hear. Not only is it hard to hear, but I was in a firefight one time, and the people I had been there for a while, and they hadn't been in this they'd been in training, but they had not been in live action combat. And so they all laid down, like they were taught, and they were prepared to shoot. And I've got no time to tell them, stand up, don't lay down and shoot, because here's what happens when in a given environment in Iraq, when you're fighting over the desert, when you lay down and shoot, you just blow up a big old dust cloud. And so now that's great for your own hiding, right? But it's also great for the enemy, because now everybody can move freely and no one can shoot effectively. And so it's really, you not only can't hear, now you can't see, you can't smell because your nose is full of dirt. And then you get to the chow hall and someone's like, are you bleeding? And you get mystery blood. You're like, I'm not bleeding. Who was bleeding? And you look around and someone was bleeding somewhere because there's blood all over you, but you can't account for it. And then someone who doesn't ever go out has the audacity to say, you fellas got to get cleaned up before you come in this chow hall. Like, fuck you. I need a burrito. I'll take a to-go plate, but I'm not going to get cleaned up before I do this, because we've been out for 8 hours. Combat is a crazy thing. Sorry, Gabby. I took a question from you, so I'll shut up. But I wanted to give that
not
context.
at all. I just think it's interesting, and your ability to describe everything that you've just described certainly puts us right in the spot that you were in. I've got to tell you, I probably won't ever forget baby wipes being twisted up into a nose and concrete falling out. That's pretty amazing. I just was curious. I wanted to also bring in, because I think your memoir is really about life's lessons and how it taught you to evaluate as you grew as an adult, the things that came your way. Can you share with us a little bit about, in your book, it's pretty much the beginning of your own childhood, your relationship with your mother, all of that, which in many ways, after, when I was reading it, I was thinking these are the kinds of things that either will make you or break you. Your sister Isabel, I mean, you both went through some harrowing times in your family life. Share a little bit about that with us, and also your own memories of what stands out. As you said, why is it always kids? Being in Iraq and witnessing what family life was like in the worst of conditions possible, which is a war zone.
Okay. Well, in the context with my mother in particular was my mother was a schizophrenic. Jesus. And that, especially at that particular point, that people didn't talk about that. It was something that shamed families. It was hidden. And my experience has always been that if something is suppressed and hidden, then it always inevitably makes it worse. So like when I said I first went to war when I was 5 years old, a lot of that was, part of it was my father's, the lessons to try to help us be stronger, better, whatever. But my mother, it's important to know, my mother made this beautiful world. Schizophrenics, they try to live in the reality of their creating. And when we were young, she would tell us these beautiful, amazing stories that would just sit on your seat, at the edge of your seat. What's she going to say next? How's it going to go? And she made it out so our world was this one thing. But then the problem with schizophrenia is reality comes knocking on your door, and the dreamscape, the fantasy doesn't survive the necessities of what is real life going on. And it becomes a perception versus reality kind of thing. And when schizophrenics reach the point where their world shatters, they do generally two things. They either withdraw from what reality is because it's too painful for them, or they become violent and they fight for what they think their world is. And my mother was of the later quality. Is this
the stories that you share about what she would tell you and your sister? I mean, I found it extraordinary, because the detailing of how she was working for the CIA and she was working for, that was the fantasy that she was actually living in, that she was useful and was someone of importance. Now, your father wasn't around all the time. And so it seemed like she would put the blame on you for a lot of that, and would repeatedly, which is harrowing to read, and to think that a small boy is actually facing such a rejection from so much responsibility is being laid at your feet as to why a father is no longer around. So you do an amazing job of describing the emotional, really situating the reader there in that moment when you're experiencing that. So I definitely applaud you for that, because you make it very real, but also at the same time, this was your life. This was what you were experiencing at the hands of schizophrenic, which at the time, like you said, was not something that was really shared or talked about. So a lot of what you experienced seemed to be something that would you are now in this memoir kind of letting out. Do you feel that writing this has actually freed quite a bit, that you feel relieved in putting, kind of unburdening yourself from a lot of that in writing this?
That's a good question. And that's a question that my friends asked me a lot when I was going through, because, I spent personally a lot of time trying to figure out what normal was. And, I modeled a bunch of things. I tried to sort out what we were going through from what I saw my friends going through, other people. So I had a lot of things that I had wrapped up very, very tightly to deal with them, because growing up in the way I did is a lot like being a combat veteran later on in life, because you get a bunch of veterans around, and especially at, let's say, a party where one of their wives is a teacher in the middle school. Not that this happened, but it did. And you get a bunch of guys to get a few drinks. They start telling war stories, and then one of them will say, "Yeah, like that one time I was behind you and you got hit, and I had to wipe some of you off of me," and then they'll go on, and then at that point, since you both live to tell the tale, it's kind of morbidly funny, and then you look and you realize that everyone that from the polite civilian world has stopped their conversation and is looking at you with this look on their face, and it's time to really carry part of your party somewhere else. Mm-hmm. As a kid, it's kind of the same thing. One of the things that was important to me And this gets to what you're saying, was it cathartic to be able to do this?
Right.
And the short answer is yes, it was, because there is a lot of healthy things that, regardless where you are in your life, whether you are a veteran or you were, you grew up in the way with a family that was much more loving and consistent, or you grew up by yourself, or regardless of where we come from, it's important to every once in a while unpack the things that bother us the most. Everyone, regardless where you come from, has got a bad or a traumatic experience or something that didn't go right. But it's really important to take the time that if it was an experience that's still influencing your life that came from when you were young, it's important to take a moment, and as painful as it is, deconstruct it, decode it, dissect it, and look at it from the maturity of who you are now and
Adult.
what you've learned in your experiences as an adult. Exactly. And try to put that memory in context. What can you learn from it? What can't you learn from it? Was it bad? Yes. Do you ever want that to not happen again? Now that you're not a scared little kid, you're an adult with additional skills. You can view that in a way where you can make that pain productive. And it's not easy, but I'm a huge advocate.
I think that's an example of true growth, to be able to take a terrible experience and as you say, take out, unburden yourself of the packages that we're carrying inside, and take a dispassionate look at it as an adult, and with your ability it's different eyes from a 5-year-old or a 10-year-old, and the experiences that you had, having raised my son in the military life, and knowing so many, of course, having lived this my whole life. One of the things that I when I was reading your book, I was thinking back to, there is a bit of that with the experiences that our own children in this day and age, who have gone through 12 deployments or whatever the deployments have been, the amounts of it. I always relay that back to when I'm asked about how do you guys cope with the deployment and all that comes with it. And I always bring them back to, have you ever seen a welcome home video? And you see the dad who surprises the little girl or boy at a game or something. And you see that person, that little girl who 2 seconds before she sees her dad is just, going about her business of class or playing, whatever it is. And then when she sees the parent that's standing there in front of her, it's like a wall that just crumbles. So, and that is the wall that is put up by a child to be able to cope with the loss and the missing of the parent who is deployed. And I really feel that in many ways, that's one of those conversations that reintegration back from combat into the family is so crucial, to let those kids out, let that out. Because I think it's something that for the decade of war we've been in and longer is something that is very important. I mean, it's enabled you to grow and to, really take an experience such as combat and draw a parallel to the life that you had growing up as a child in a very chaotic situation. And those lessons you've applied to your life as a father. I read the part about Xander when he was born. When you ended it, I think that chapter with, is it a good idea or something along those lines to bring a child? And you didn't know, but you felt that moment, you like I think all parents do when you have a child. It's like this most amazing, awe-inspiring moment of, wow, this little person here. And there's no longer an I, it's a we, and you move forward from that. How is it with your children as far as with the book, and how have they received it or reacted to it?
I was a great parent up until my children became teenagers. And then when I think it's important to know that teenagers are still growing and they look like adults, and sometimes they talk like adults, but they're not really there. And one of the reasons they're not really there is because one of the parts that's still growing is their brain. I struggled with the teenage years for my boys because for a lot of reasons. I think a lot of fathers go through the point where, fathers and sons and mothers and daughters, there's a certain point where children are trying to become adults and they're trying to establish their dominance in certain situations, and parents and children go head to head. I think that's natural, and I think it's supposed to happen, but that was the biggest challenge for me. My son Xander in particular, he went through a period where he just had difficulties and then this goes back to what my father tried to teach me, and a lot of children do this, is following through on what he said he was going to do. And for me, that was a big issue. For him, because I started, it meant it was done. And we had to go round and round about definitions. And I had to be very strict with him. And I had to say, in the end, it was more about delegation. I said, okay, you want to be an adult, then these are the things that you have to do. And I'm not going to tell you how to do any of these things. It's pretty much basic leadership 101 is define the task, make sure the person has the tools to do the task, and then give them the freedom to do the task on a certain timeline. But on a certain timeline, you're accountable. And that for me was a challenge because he struggled with that because he was still growing in a lot of areas. But we got through it. It was, I think, like most parents and children, it was a stressful time for us. I'm really proud of the man he's growing into now. I think that for me, the hardest thing was, even though I knew what the outcome was going to be, like most parents is, our job is we're supposed to teach problem solving skills to our kids. And part of teaching problem solving kids, whether they're a new recruit or your child, is that what you're really doing is you're giving them a tool and then letting them fail with it a million little times. So that way they've mastered that tool. So when the big things come, that they can be successful and move on. But knowing that they're going to fail, watching them fail, seeing that train wreck, and then your job being I'm just going to pick you up, dust you off, point you in the right direction again. And we'll debrief it. You got this, good, until they master that. That for me was the hardest thing. Yeah.
And I think that it probably, in a lot of ways, in the military life, I think a lot of our kids grow up with that same, here's what right looks like. You have to follow through because of the men and women wearing the uniform and your training. I know my son experienced that with his father, trying to teach him to follow through. And, but I think it also butts up against the world in which we live in, where children are really not, it's a different society, right. A lot of ways. Participation. Oh, that's good. Good. Here's a gold star. No, that's not enough. That's not the way the world is going to work. And so you have parents kind of come, button heads with, in some ways, with the training or the world that the schools and really our world is really kind of telling them, participation is just as good. And that's not the way the world works. And as parents, we want our children to have those tools, as you say, to be able to deal with the challenges that are going to come their way. And it's never easy as a parent to watch your children fail, because all you want to do is be there and wrap them up when they were babies and say, okay, let's take care of you. So I certainly understand what you mean by that. Have your boys read the book?
That's a really good question. They've been involved with some of the parts of the book. My youngest just turned 15, Sam, and he is actually reading the book now. And I tried to not say, hey, I published this book. They've been to a couple of events. They've heard me talk about certain topics. We've talked over the years about, I've tried to not say bad things about my parents, but there were some reasons why some visits didn't happen, and I've always tried to make it positive. Everyone's family is different, and we're just not in the right place that we can do it right now. But my oldest ordered the book because he wanted to order it on Amazon, and I had when you write, you have advanced copies and things like that. I'm like, you could just take one if you want. No, I'm going to wait until it's done. And he surprised me the other day where he actually got his Amazon shipment, and he unboxed it, and he's like, look what I've got. I'm like, you're actually going to read it? And he's like, oh yeah. I think he's going to read it critically, just to have some hard questions for me, but bring it on. My youngest, though, is at that age, being 15, where he just finished a big bout of rebelling against authority, and we've got to the point now where we've resolved that, and I think we're in a really happy place. And I am really keen to see what his perspective is, because this is one of the things that I think is hard. And a person that I mentioned in the book that I call John, he was a clandestine service officer that was a mentor and really, really left a mark. For a long time, he was sort of like a father figure for me when I was struggling with my father. One of the things he said about fathers and sons or children in general was, you live in this world that your kids will never understand. I mean, they have safety, good schools, potable water, and Happy Meals. that's what they know. They're never going to be able to understand where you came from. So don't even try. Just try to take those lessons and figure out a way where you can put it in a way that they will get. And that was something I struggled with, because I think all parents do, especially if you came from modest means or things were tough and you've been able to provide a lot. But it's really true. People know what they know. They have trouble conceptualizing what they don't know because it's not real to them.
We're talking with Bill Riley, who's an author and wrote the book Baghdaddy, How Saddam Hussein Taught Me to Be a Better Father. The best place to get a hold of Bill is BillRileyAuthor.com. Riley is Riley. If you can't find him, you can find me, Pete A. Turner, on all social media. Gaby is a Homefront Girl everywhere. So we want you to be able to get a hold of Bill. Bill wants to talk to you. Bill, what's next? I mean, the book has been awesome, but what are you going to do next?
Well, I've got a few speaking gigs that have been really good. October, I'll be talking to the largest gathering of veterans in the state of Idaho at the Warhawk Museum in Nampa. But in between, I've been working on wrapping up my last book. In fact, this morning, before I came on, I'm editing the last chapter, and then I've got to, once I finish, I'll get it to my editor. But for me, the next phase is I'm writing a young adult fantasy thriller series. Magic, what if science? It's been really fun and exciting. Baghdaddy will be the last true story I ever tell.
All right. So far.
Yeah, never say never, right?
Right. I can totally cut to Bill 3 years from now. All right, one more.
Yeah, and you'll be putting the screws to me, Bill. When I had you on my show, you said, "How do you like it?"
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely would too.
Yeah, Pete would do that,
but only in good fun.
Yeah.
Only in good fun. I think your book was amazing. Thanks for, I've really, truly enjoyed being a part of this podcast and speaking with you. I think you've done a phenomenal job of doing a interesting comparison with your own life growing up to what you encountered in combat and how you've kind of pieced it all together. I think it'll help a lot of people. I think you did a great job, and it's been a pleasure to have met you, Bill. Thank you, Pete, for having me on.
Yeah, it's my pleasure to have you guys both on. I want to give Bill the last word, but yeah, thank you very much, Gaby, for doing this. Let's continue to do it. And Bill, really, seriously, thank you for doing this. Thank you for telling your story and getting in front of veterans and helping to share this thing. I know what you're doing matters and helps people, and my friends out there in the audience, they're going to appreciate it and they're going to support you. And anybody who buys the book, don't forget, rate it 5 stars, review it. That's how you get Bill's book to elevate and get recommended to other books, and that's how you help him out. You can tell he's a great dude. You hear his story and his genuine love for what he's doing and for everybody else. So support him with those stars and that comment. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. It can be a joke, but just do that, and that's how the algorithm works. So support him by buying, rating, and reviewing. Bill, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Pete. Thank you for having me. It was a great experience.